Hi, everyone. Welcome to Artist Ecosystem. I'm Andrea Grover, the Executive Director of Guildhall. This is a co-presentation of Guildhall and the newly launched The Church in Sag Harbor, an artist residency, exhibition space, and creative center founded by Eric Fischl and April Gornick. We're pleased to also have Sarah Cochran, who helped to co-present this program. She is the Executive Director of The Church, and she'll be joining us towards the conclusion of the program. Artist Ecosystem is a conversation series that was launched in 2019 by Eric Fischl with support from Elise Trucks as an initiative of the Guildhall Academy of the Arts, in which Eric serves as president. The Academy is an honorary body of 200 plus creative professionals affiliated with Guildhall. As part of our 90th anniversary in 2021, we are building programming around the robust ideas and passions of the Academy members, living and past. I'm pleased to begin to introduce tonight's guest. Eric Fischl is among the most influential figurative artists of our time. He is a fellow of both the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Eric Fischl and April Gornick founded The Church as a new concept creative center in Sag Harbor. This is an innovative new organization, which he will speak about tonight. Also joining us is Stephen Petronio. Stephen is a choreographer, dancer, and artistic director of Stephen Petronio Company. His work spans 35 years and addresses the intuitive and complex possibilities of the body in shifting cultural contexts. His training originated with leading figures of the Jetson era. Stephen has created over 35 works for his company and has been commissioned by some of the world's most prestigious modern and ballet companies. He has collaborated with artists of every discipline, including members of the Guildhall Academy, such as Cindy Sherman, Donald Batchelor, and Laurie Anderson. Tonight, he will discuss the inventive work of Petronio Residency Center. Emily Simoness is an entrepreneur, teacher, facilitator, and former actress and acclaimed orator. She is co-founder and executive director of Space on Ryder Farm. Emily has worked with premier theatrical venues such as the Public Theater and Williamstown Theater Festival, and has developed acting curriculum for NYU and the North Carolina School for the Arts. She co-founded Tie Dyin for Biden and helped raise over $165,000 for Democratic candidates during the 2020 election cycle. Since its inception in 2011, Space has helped artists and activists develop new work. Emily is here tonight to talk about the work of Space on Ryder Farm. Mary Jane Marcasiano is our moderator. She is a fashion and costume designer, film programmer, and producer, as well as a social entrepreneur and nonprofit leader. Marcasiano serves as Director of Strategic Partnerships for Cinema Tropical, a nonprofit that promotes Latin American cinema, and she is Director of Development for Impact Repertory Theater, a program for under-resourced youth in Harlem. Her NYU master's thesis was entitled Upscale, Scaling Up Nonprofit Capacity. It explored the nonprofit sector as ecosystem and inspired the title for this series. I'm pleased to welcome Mary Jane, who will introduce the program.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to the Guildhall staff, Elise Trucks, our co-producer, Josh Gladstone, Artistic Director of the John Drew Theater, and Patrick Dawson, our tech host tonight. A very warm thank you to Eric, April, and Sarah for inviting me to produce this talk. I'd also like to thank Space on Ryder Farm board member Robbie Stein for introducing me to the project and to Emily. And to Jill Brienza, board chair of the Stephen Petronio Dance Company, for telling me about the residency program. In 2019, Eric created the Art as Ecosystem series to measure the health and vitality of art beyond the marketplace. The 2019 talks featured prominent art world members, artists, private collectors, artist foundations, educators, and executives. One of his guests, Rick Lowe, creator of Project Row Houses, was the inspiration for tonight's discussion. After his presentation, I became fascinated with the idea of how artists create and define community. So tonight, the focus is on this aspect of the ecosystem. Tonight's guests are genuinely multidimensional members of the art ecosystem. They have elaborated on or transformed their original artistic careers to include community building. Their disciplines are theater, dance, and the visual arts, and their projects span in age from 10 years old to newly opening. The topics we'll discuss tonight are what was the motivation to create their projects and the challenges in envisioning and launching them? How do they define community? And how does equity issues impact this concept? Towards the end of the conversation, we'll take questions from the audience. If you can type them into the Q&A box on the bottom of the Zoom, we'll answer as many as we can. So to start the evening, each of our panelists will tell you a bit about their projects. I'd like to introduce Emily Simoness to start. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. What a group. So yes, my name is Emily, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Space on Ryder Farm. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the founding story. Ryder Farm has actually been in my family since 1795. Though I had never visited the farm, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The farm is in Brewster, New York, about 80 minutes north of the city. I had heard tale about this place as a kid. It was sort of folkloric, this place on the East Coast, stuck in the middle of the country. And I lodged it somewhere in my memory. It wasn't until I moved to New York City in 2007. And on a lark, I called my fourth cousin once removed, Betsy Ryder, in 2009. And I said, hi, I'm related to you. Can I come check out that farm? It's been in our family since the dawn of time. And she said, sure. I was an actor at the time. And to be clear, that day, I had no intention to be doing what I'm doing today. I had an intention to get on a train, leave New York City, check out this place, take a picture for my mom, and that would be that. That is not what happened. What happened that day is really three things. I had three aha moments. The first is that the fact that one would refer to Brewster, New York as upstate is charming. It is not upstate. It is about 80 minutes north of the city. So the first thing was, oh my gosh, it's so close to New York City. Second thing, oh my gosh, it's not 8 acres, which is what I had imagined. It's 127-acre expanse. Wow, there's woodland and there's pasture and there's lakefront and there's these beautiful 1795 buildings. Third aha moment, and perhaps the one that has me speaking to you, is that I opened the door to the 1795 homestead, and it was clear that it hadn't been lived in or taken care of for a very long time. It was in need of tremendous TLC. So I left that day, couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, another thing I couldn't stop thinking about is that at the time I was 25, and I was an actor, and I was in a community of artists, many playwrights and directors that didn't have time and space to work on their creative pursuits. New York City is fantastic. I hope you would agree with me. But it is perhaps not, it could be argued that it is challenging to make creative work there. So these two needs, artists' need for time and space, and my newly realized need of my long lost family homestead's need for rehabilitation, were independently rolling around in my head. They collided. I thought, have I got an idea? I am going to bring my scrappy 25-year-old artist friends up to this 225-year-old homestead. We're going to make capital improvements, think spackle, paint, etc., and we'll get to work on our art. So what started as a sweat equity arrangement, quickly by 2011, we had filed for our 501c3 nonprofit status, and cut to 2021, we're in our 11th year of serving artists. And in those 11 years, we have supported about 1,400 artists of all stripes. I would say about 60% of the artists are theater artists, writers, but we also support dancers, filmmakers, visual artists, social activists. Folks join us for 1 to 5 week, fully subsidized creative residencies. And there are 3 mandates on your time when you're in residence at Space. You have to attend 3 communal meals daily. 2, you have to give back a little bit to Ryder Farm. And 3, you have to share some of what you created at the culmination of your residency. So that is a very fast forward, but basically founded the organization in 2011, 10 years later, here we are. And the one other piece of it that makes it even more unique, perhaps, is that the farm has been a working farm in its most recent iteration since 1978. And in 2019, Space on Ryder Farm, the nonprofit that I run, took over the organic farming operation. So now we are one part artist residency program and one part organic farm. That is the history. When I think about the place and I think about the community that it serves, I think it's worth noting that that community has really changed over time. Not only has it grown for being not just a place for theater artists, but for all stripes of artists. But I think most specifically in 2017, the organization made a commitment to grant 50% of its residencies to folks of color and other underrepresented voices. And I look at 2017 as really the moment that the organization really changed in who it was serving and the intentionality of that service and the transparency of that service. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the why that commitment in 2017 was made, or sort of how that came to pass. So I said that one of the mandates is that you have to attend 3 communal meals daily. Well, I sit at all those meals and I have conversations, and many conversations over the course of our June through October season with all sorts of artists. So I would sit at these tables and I would have conversations in the early days. So this is like 2013, 2014, 2015. And what started to occur to me is that the collection of people around the table were really homogenous in all the ways that we think about homogeneity. So race, geographical location, age, type of art. And it wasn't necessarily bad. It was that a conversation that happened in June with one artist cohort, it started to become clear to me that a very similar conversation was happening in August with a different group of people, though because their perspectives were similar, it felt like, oh, you could really swap in any group for any group. And perhaps we're not engaging the diversity of perspective that could be really interesting and useful and perhaps our charge, right? And so we started to think about what are all the ways that the organization could champion more diversity. And that is when we came up with a 50% mandate. Since then, we also, at the very, very beginning of Space, there was a nominal fee for 50% of the artists to offset our costs. And in 2017, we zeroed out all of those costs, again, as a way to reduce any barriers to entry. So that's the bit about equity that has continued to today. It is a big part of our mission, and I feel very passionate that more and different perspectives lead to hopefully a better world. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do in the community that we're creating. I was asked to sort of contemplate, what's at stake for the arts and the artist community that Space has fostered, and also what's at stake for agriculture in this moment. And I've just been thinking about during this time, it's been interesting to lead an organization with one foot in the arts and one foot in agriculture, one foot in a business farming that has been essential this whole time during the pandemic. And then the art space, which, we all know that it's essential, but it was not deemed an essential business. And how those two lenses have been so interesting to sort of be in conversation, and how I think we're seeing what happens in a culture that isn't able to sort of consume and be in community with art and the artistic process. I could talk about that for a long time, but I'm going to wrap up. What I will say very quickly, and this will probably be unique to me because I don't think anyone else is running a farm, but what's at stake for agriculture is quite alarming. Between 2011 and 2018, the American Farmland Trust estimates that an acre of farmland is lost to development every 2 minutes. Which is shocking. By the time I've been finished talking, we will have lost 5 acres to development. So Space's dual mission of supporting artists and activists and their work and contributing to the sustainability of this place is really about how can we nurture both the land and the artist, and sort of what are the intersections. Yeah, that's me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Emily. So now I'd like to invite Stephen Petronio to talk about his project. Stephen, thank you.
Hey there, I'm Stephen Petronio. I'm the artistic director of the Stephen Petronio Company, which wraps in several different, I think of it as a crown with several jewels in it. So a crown for the people, crown for the artist people. So I started out, my company's 35 years old. It started out in a very simple, direct way, a company to produce and present the work of Stephen Petronio. And I did that in collaboration with many beautiful artists over the course of many years. And then somewhere around my 30th anniversary, Merce Cunningham passed away. And then my mentor, Trisha Brown, became gravely ill. And so I did the unthinkable, and I began to shift the focus, or share the focus, between my work and the works of these great postmodern masters like Trisha and Merce and Steve Paxton and Yvonne Rainer. I created a project called the Bloodlines Project. And, honestly, it doesn't sound like much when I'm saying it now, but to shift the resources, the hard-earned resources, from things that support my work to other people's work was a big deal. And it was very frightening. And as soon as I did it, my entire life changed. And then, the next level of change was, I had been looking for a place for the company to work in the country. For a residency for the Stephen Petronio Company. And as soon as I opened up my mind a little bit, I realized that it was not about my company. It was about the next generation of artists. And so I had this idea to make the Petronio Residency Center, which I am the director of, but I'm the founder of, but the director is Maria Warshaw, who was formerly of Brooklyn Art Exchange. So she's kind of heading that program. We are a research and development facility that takes away all the problems of the daily life of an artist, an artist with a group of up to 10 people. We feed them, we take care of them, and we set them free in our mountaintop reserve. So we have a little film that we're going to show you, and it does a lot of the explanation, and I'll see you back on the other side of that. So Patrick, would you mind rolling that film? Artists are invited here to interrupt what they consider their normal chain of production or creativity, and we interrupt it with quiet and nature. They know how to produce what they produce wherever they go, but when that gets interrupted, it's a potent tool for creative advancement and change. So welcome to the top of the world. We're in Round Top, New York, and you're at the Petronio Residency Center at Crow's Nest. So this is the biggest tree house I've ever been in, and we call it the Perch. Every time any dancer has ever walked in here, they face this diagonal, and you know, you could see them projecting themselves into space. When I was looking for just the right place to inspire the dancers that would be working here, I thought, well, the house is great. There's plenty of bedrooms. There's enough bathrooms. The studio is already there. It just needs a little bit of, it needs a floor and some lighting. But when I walked out here into this space, which we call the perch, my mind was totally blown. And I reached my arms out to both sides and I said, I'm not leaving until this place belongs to the company. The Petronio Residency Center at Crow's Nest was conceived as a research and development facility for the inspiring young minds of the next generation of dance makers. We wanted to create a space for the makers of dance to be in nature, cut off from the distractions they normally have in their everyday life. And this is the thing that we don't ever get when we're working in an urban center is undistracted time. It's a creative oasis where all the pressures of all the rest of the responsibilities melt away and they can get down to that essential place that's necessary to make a new work of art. It's really for the next generation of dance makers who desperately need the space to develop their voices. When I was a young choreographer just starting out, Trisha Brown arranged for me to rent the basement of 541 Broadway in Manhattan. 5,000 square feet for $100 a month changed my life as a dance maker. And so that generosity really stayed with me throughout my career, and it left a deep impression on me, and this is really a nod to that kind of gesture that Trisha made to me. This is conceived as a beginning stage research and development facility for movement artists to work outside of the pressures of the marketplace. There's no market-driven ideals going on here. There's no deliverables that we ask for when we award someone a retreat here. I cannot express to you how important and how deep and how organic the connection between all the artists can become when you're spending 24/7 living and working together. That can never be achieved in the city working for 4 or 6 or 8 hours a day. Things that I've been hearing from the artists that come here are that you can get more done in a week in this kind of quiet situation than you can in a month in an urban situation. The needs of a choreographer or a dancer are very simple. They need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to have space that they can move in. And I cannot tell you what it means to have the right space to go into the unknown and to the unconscious process that it takes to make a new work that's undiscovered up until that moment. To the naked eye, it just seems like a space, but this emptiness represents the potential of great works of dance, and so to have the right conditions is super important. Right now, this is just a blank space, but next year, it might be the next great dance. So just a couple things I want to say. There are several ways to get here. There's the Petronio Residency Center Award, which is it's given. It starts with a nomination panel. A very diverse group of people from across the country nominate several artists each, and then there's a 3 or 4 panel of artists who make the final selection. So it's a producer and director driven nominations, artist selection. And diversity is really, really important to us as well. it's part, this residency center is part of the umbrella of the Stephen Petronio company. But, you know, I am a white man over 60, and how to deal with the inequity of the dance world is a very important issue for us. So we've made that that panel as diverse as possible, and that's the beginning of understanding what our role is going to be in relationship to this story. So you can get an award by nomination. There are co-residencies that we also have. For example, I work with dancers responding to AIDS. We share the costs of a residency for a selected artist that we decide between us. I work with Dance Space in Manhattan. We do that every year with funds from the dance force. We select an artist together, and so we have a shared residency with them. Recently, we've been working with Works in Process at the Guggenheim. So we've had a couple of artists up here on shared residencies. And now, just very recently, we've started a new initiative, which is an applied for residency. So you can apply for this residency, and it's called Restore and Retreat. It's a pilot. We'll only be giving 2 of those residencies out, but and we just opened it up to application. But you can go to patron.io and you can hit on the residency button, and you'll find out more about that. The last thing I want to say is you know, when I was looking for this space, I was hoping for 10 acres. I ended up with 177 acres of a mountaintop surrounded by the Catskill Preserve. So we are protected up here. We're at the end of the road. It's a dead end at the top of the mountain, and there's only bear behind us. So there's bear all around us actually. But what I realized very early on was that this land needed to be protected. Even the board of directors who I love so much, you know, we're in control of this land, which was taken from the Mohegan Indians. So what can we do to remedy that? So we've just recently, in collaboration with a very prominent foundation, which I can't quite name right now, but we've put 77 acres into reserve, and so it will not be developed in perpetuity. So although the company owns the land, it can never be developed. And now, so we have 90 acres left, and we're working on the next preserve for that piece of land. So one of the giant missions of this company, since we ended up in this crazy place, is to merge the understanding of what the importance of our environment is with the cultural agenda that we have. So really, we started all about giving artists what we thought they need to make work, but putting them in nature where it's incredibly quiet and incredibly reflective has made us understand our situation in a new way. So we are now hoping to find a director that's as potent as Maria for the environmental programs that we hope to develop in the future. So that's what I'll tell you about the Petronia Residency Center. We could talk more later.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And now we'll hear from Eric, who is live from the church.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me and continuing this discussion over the last couple of years. As you can see from the 2 that came before me, that they're, you know, neck deep or waist deep in trying to figure out the programming and the opportunities and the give back to their communities that they're very attached to. We are at the absolute beginning of that same journey. I hold them in high regard. I'm, you know, inspired by the work of all of the artists that have found ways to create opportunities for other artists, and so I take that forward with me into this project that April and I are trying to put together. Um, the church, which it was named by default, and by default, I say because when I bought the church, everyone in the village, everyone that knew me would keep asking, what are you going to do with the church? What's happening at the church? The church just became the name by default. And in a way, it's a kind of perfect name for the kind of the archetypal level that I'm imagining we could function on. The church was built in 1835, I believe, moved to its current site in 1864, decommissioned as a church in, I think, 2004, and then went through a series of ownerships that tried various, renovations for residency, co-op residents, private homes, and a showroom for handmade wallpapers and other home decor. Unfortunately, the church was in such bad repair that it took a tremendous amount of money to bring it up to a structural level that it could actually begin to function. And the person that I bought it from fortunately did that before I purchased it. So that wasn't a burden for me. April and I have lived in Sag Harbor for 40 years, part-time for a lot of it, but since 2004, we've been here full-time. It's a town that means a great deal to me and to April. I forget, I think in the 90s, April got involved with a group of people who were fighting box stores from coming into the town. And it became a very dramatic, very animated fight against big money and against turning this town into something that was pretty much just like any other town. 4 years ago, the cinema burned down. The cinema sits in the absolute middle of Main Street and is an icon and an identity icon for the residents in this town. It's got a great history to it. And it burned down, and it became urgent for people to buy it, to try to restore it as a cinema, because it lost its landmark status, having been gutted. And April was very much a part of putting that together to purchase the property. The thing that stunned me was that they raised very quickly $1 million from $50, $100, and $500 donations, which showed me that there was such a broad base to a pyramid that absolutely wanted this iconic structure, this cultural venue, to be center of their town. And then the other thing that stunned me was that the big money that came in to purchase the cinema came from artists who had been very successful in their field. So within film and theater, music, visual arts, they all came together to also say, we want this to be part of this town and to be a cultural center for it. And that got me thinking about other things as well. I had started a small residency out of a house in Sag Harbor, and it was just happened to be across the street from the church. And when the church became available, to me, it was a no-brainer that this was what we had to get. Because if we wanted to bring a kind of cultural vitality to this town, we needed space to do it in. And, the pictures that you're looking at here is the renovation of that building. We tried to marry the intervention of the new with the integrity of the old without trying to hide one or blend it in, but just have it harmoniously be there. This was very much part of the talent and the vision of the architect Lee Skolnick, who I have worked with for many years in different projects. And I think it was very successful in that regard. I want to say something about the town of Sag Harbor. For those of you who don't know, it's a town that's out in the Hamptons area. It's on the north side of the South Fork, the Bay Area. It's in a harbor. Historically, it was originally a landing spot for people coming from abroad. So there was the first customs house was here. Its early industry was whaling, shipbuilding, and it's a town that, unlike the other towns in the Hamptons, was always something that produced a product that went out into a global economy. And I say that because it has a certain kind of DNA that is cosmopolitan. The diversity of the people that have historically inhabited this town, who inhabit this town today, speak to that quality. There's a great range of people from very wonderful, very interesting historically middle class and upper class Black community that's here. There's a Hungarian Jewish population. There's a large gay population, a mixture of craftspeople, blue collar workers, industrialists, etc. And one of the things that is attractive about it is that because of its cosmopolitan nature, because it had a sense of itself in a larger world, it's tolerant. And that is what I think attracted people to it. It's always had a thriving art community as a part of it, mostly a writers community, but nonetheless a long, deep history going back to Herman Melville, James Fenimore Cooper, and moving forward. And it is something that I used to see as parallel to the production history of the town, the industry of the town. But over the last 15 years, 20 years or something, Sag Harbor's been moving in a gentrification way towards becoming just like the other towns in the Hamptons, which to me is an incredibly boring and lost opportunity for some town as special as this. So I had this idea that in order to sort of slow it down, we're not going to change the direction to any great extent, but to slow it down and to make it interesting. Wouldn't it be great if we could form the town based on the visions of the artists that are here in a way that made it an authentic environment? And we have structurally a town that has on the south side the Whaling Museum, the library, and the church. In the middle of town, we have the new cinema. And at the north end of town, we have Bay Street Theater. So we actually have created an arts district in this town. And what I'm looking forward to is putting content into that structure in a way that changes the reason that people come here, that they come to have an authentic artistic experience out of the different genres, different disciplines that will be presented. The ambition of the church in terms of developing the architecture for it was to a kind of build it, they will come mentality. We wanted to create a space that was large, open, not predetermined about its uses, but trying to cover enough bases that it could be used for a great variety of things, from performance to both musical and dance and theater type events to visual arts exhibitions, studio spaces, creative workshops. And one of the ambitions I have came out of an experience with 9/11, where I noticed that this country was suffering terribly, and they didn't reach out to the artists to help them figure out how to deal with the trauma that we had just suffered. That it wasn't an instinct to reach out to the artists, to give handholds, to give language, to give images that could be shared, ways of sharing experiences that could bring us back together. So that feeling of disconnect between what I know is the most important aspect of art in a culture and the fact that it was unneeded or seemingly unneeded made me want to see how I could change that, how I could figure out ways to change that. Part of the problem is that with the disconnect is that there's an illiteracy that has seeped into the culture where they actually don't know what they're looking at. And because they don't know what they're looking at, they don't know how to process it, they don't know how to participate in it, they don't know how to internalize it. So I began to think about ways to separate creativity from art. It seemed like art was presenting too much of a burden, too much of an onus on people who didn't feel comfortable because they didn't know enough. And I was thinking about as a kid learning baseball and starting out with t-ball and then little league and then school sports, high school, college, and then on to the pros. That train goes with beginning very early on to learn the rules of the game, some of the sort of master some of the physicality of it. The older you get, the more you get control of your body, and you begin to be able to do more, and the subtleties of the game become apparent. If you're really good at it, you keep moving forward into it if you're passionate about it. All along the line, the attrition rate is phenomenal. But the one thing is about it is that everybody who's played the game knows what they're looking at. And they can tell, looking at a professional game, who's playing well, who's not, what an extraordinary play was, what a great strategy, et cetera, et cetera. I want the same thing to happen with the arts. I want people to not feel that in order to create, you have to become an artist, that happens so far down the road that it's not important to people to think about it in those terms. What it is important is to get in touch with the creative mind and the creative spirit. And so that's some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of programming for the church. We're also going to be running an artist residency program. We have 4 bedrooms and a shared kitchen and studio spaces that will facilitate the residents. We're looking to have a variety of disciplines all at the same time. I love cross-pollination. We're also going to be working with the local artists here to create works or to develop programs, et cetera, et cetera. As I say, we're in the very early stage of this, so it's quite a dream still. But for April and I, it's a very exciting one. And I'll turn it back to the panel now.
Thank you, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, Eric, you have a very clear picture of how what your project is, how it's a part of the community. I'd like to hear a little bit from Emily and Stephen about the community where they're based, not the community that you're bringing in, and how do you manage what Eric is, what his goal is to do is to mix the two.
I guess, shall I go?
Sure.
Well, that's a crucial thing. And, of course, I understood that, but I really didn't understand it until I got into the property. So I live up in Round Top. We live up in Round Top, New York, which is across the Hudson River. It's a more reddish county that I live in. And so there was some skepticism about what we were going to be doing, what craziness we were going to be doing here. One of the things we began to do immediately was develop our education program. And because we're not on Main Street the way you are, Eric, we're this hidden away, tucked away private thing. So how do we engage with the community? So our director of education, Marcus McCabe, was a dancer with Dance Theater of Harlem. He already lived here. We became fast friends very quickly. He began to develop, he was already teaching in all of the schools in our county for free. So we raised money to give him a salary to do it through a Petronia residency center, so that we began in our first season to have workshops for kids up here. And I cannot tell you, first of all, no one knows what the property is incredible and no one's ever seen it. So the parents come and they hang out. We have a big 6,500 square foot house. We brought the parents up there. They were having lunch while the kids are dancing and taking their workshops. And, it's a timeout for everybody. So the family gets to rest while their kid is growing into, they don't have to go to New York, or they don't have to go to Westchester or White Plains for a dance class. They can actually have a dance class in Round Top, New York. Go figure. So we've been expanding our presence in the schools. We've reached over 1,800 students this year. And of course, we're into the virtual world of teaching now, because a lot of the schools are not in session. So Marcus has developed a series of videos that go, and sometimes when Marcus would go into the school, he would teach a dance class in place of gym or shop. So the kids had that choice. Do I go to gym? Do I go to shop? Or do I dance? These different classes are now begging Marcus for his content, because the kids really they need to dance. So that's one of the ways that we're addressing the community.
Yeah, I can jump in. So, it's been interesting. I will say that my thinking about it being place-based has really evolved. I think at the beginning of Space, it was a place for my New York City friends to go. And I still felt very much like the community was the New York City community. And we struggled in the early years to figure out how do you be the servant of two masters? And by that, I mean, folks would apply to be in residence. And for them, that meant they're going to be tucked away and they don't have to share their art and they can be in process. And the product part of it was the city, right? So I found it very challenging at the beginning to sort through how do you really honor that? And then also know that there is this local community that wants to know what it is that they're up to. And I will say that it is still, that part of it is still a work in progress. What is less a work in progress is that when we started the farm, that for me was the key that turned the lock in terms of the local community. And very quickly, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's a concept in farming called a CSA, a community supported agriculture. So if you have a farm 5 minutes from you, you can buy into their CSA. And what that means is that for the course of their season, you can get vegetables from that farm. It's essentially like going to the grocery, except you don't get to pick all the things. You just get what is ever, whatever is in harvest. So we really used that model, which is 18 weeks, June through October, to really start to make inroads in the local community. And there are two things that are unique about our CSA, and they're directly in response, I think, to that community. One, it's a sliding scale CSA. So wherever you are socioeconomically, there is a place for you. We do believe that food, just like art, is a human right, right? So if you're someone who needs to be fully subsidized, we have slots for you. If you're someone who identifies as low income, middle income, high income, and then we have a benefactor level, right? So those are folks in the community that are really able to subsidize other people. When the pandemic hit, we looked around and said, oh my gosh, food insecurity is through the roof. And so this year we fully subsidized 50% of those CSA shares. So 65 families got 18 weeks of free vegetables. And most of those folks are Latinx. So that was also really interesting. I am not a Spanish speaker, and it's been very, it's been incumbent upon us that if we're serving that community, that we really have the tools to do so, right? So all of a sudden we needed to be hiring folks on our staff who are fluent Spanish speakers, who can really meet that community where they are. We also learned that a lot of those folks didn't have access to transportation. So getting to the farm was, not possible. So we hired a driver, and that person drove the shares to those people each week. So also the first thing about the community, for me, the biggest takeaway is like actually listening to the community, whatever that community is, the myriad communities about what it is that they need, actually listening to understand, not listening to hear what you hope you can hear and what reinforces whatever your plans were. The second thing about our CSA, and then I'll stop talking, is that in addition to farm fresh vegetables, we commission what we call CSA artists. And those artists create a work of homegrown art for the CSA community. So in addition to getting 18 weeks of organic vegetables, we give you 8 pieces of art. And what has been really amazing about that is that, to sort of what Eric was talking about, it's not, if I'm going to be if I make a big generalization, it's not a community that has tremendous fluency when it comes to art and culture. In many ways, there's a feeling that it's not for them, right? And so by saying, no, you're part of this, you get food, we're also going to send you a print, or we're going to send you a short story. Maybe not everything appeals to them, but it's a way to be sharing the fruits, not just of our farmers, but of our artists. And I'll say the last thing that's been really great about the CSA is, given the pandemic, every dollar counts. And we've been able to give those folks, commissions of some money that, helps them offset their rent, et cetera. So I will say that the community piece is, it's ever changing, and it requires deep listening.
Thank you. I'm going to start to take some audience questions. And the first one is for Stephen from Brad Learmouth. He said, Stephen, as you reference the native peoples whose land you are now on, have you any plans to engage them, especially on the land you've set aside?
That's a great question, Brad. And this is just a general thing I wanted to say to both Eric and Emily, who know this really well, or to say with them that because what's unique about what we're doing is that we're artist-driven organizations. So we can, as our understanding, as our thinking, as our creative process continues to be engaged, our organizations are, I would say, small enough. They're not gigantic, cumbersome organizations that we can shift and grow. And so I'm 4 years old now, and the evolution of what this was when I started to what it is today is vastly changed. Eric, you're going to go through, what are you going to look like next year? I can't wait to see. And Emily, I know you know this. So
Do me personally look like, or do you
yes,
mean this thing?
both. So Brad, the preserve was just formal. The Conservancy was just formalized 3 weeks ago. So, I basically have been focusing on raising the enormous amount of money that it took to do that and engaging with the foundations that were going to help us get this together. So, no, and I have less clarity about that. And I want to be very frank about that. I know that this is like much of the land in Greene County, it's Mohican, and that those tribes were displaced across the river, and it somehow ended up in 200 years later ended up in my hands, so, or in the hands of the Stephen Petronio company. My first instinct was, well, we can't, when you have an organization like this, you have to worry about keeping everything running, and our basic goal is to give money to artists so that they can work. So the threat of losing this for financial reasons was, it's always looming around. And so I thought the safest thing I could do is get it into Conservancy as fast as I could. And that took me 3 years. So next stage is, Brad, that question will become, it'll float to the surface.
Thank you, Stephen. Emily, I guess, your story strikes a chord in Long Island. So Denny writes, Emily, the East End of Long Island is a farming, fishing, and arts community which goes back 400 years. You have accomplished in a short number of years about half of where we are. Funding is a must for the arts, and as now we are in a recession and a pandemic. One thing we have done is to create a community preservation fund, which gets a tiny % of tax added on to all real estate sales. This helps us purchase critical undeveloped land to preserve. It's not really a question, but if you have anything you'd like to contribute or advice for Denny.
Just thinking, no, I mean, I think that's great. I think it's easy to take for granted the land that we have, the resources that we have. And, the statistic about farms and the development is staggering. And I would just say, like, about the small, the farming community that you're talking about and the artistic community that we're talking about, those, they can't be taken for granted, right? And I think that there is a synergy between those two groups of people. There's a scrappiness and an industriousness and an elbow grease, but they do need to be bolstered by their communities, right? And I think as we look towards next year and the years after that, I mean, I do think that philanthropy is going to be sorely needed as we continue to, wade our way through the pandemic and then the economic fallout. And I think artists and farmers are perhaps not thought of as they should be.
Thank you. We're going to be wrapping up in a little while, but when we were talking amongst ourselves casually, sustainability came up in the conversation and legacy. Eric and Stephen, I know that's something that's on your mind. Emily, you're much younger, but at the same time, you've given a lot of time to this project. And I know we've talked and you have some other ideas of things that you'd like to do. So how do you guys how are you approaching this issue?
Which issue is that? What is, you're muted. What is the?
Legacy and sustainability. How do you see that? How do you see continuing this projects, beyond your own involvements?
I don't think you were in on the conversation before we started, where I was talking about how I'm like the worst person to raise money, to ask people for money. Of the three of us, apparently, Stephen and Emily are very good at being very upfront about what they need financially and stuff. So in terms of sustainability, I'm going to put the onus of that on our executive director and the board that we're forming and stuff to do that, because I'm loath to ask. In terms of legacy, I think that there's a couple of things that I've learned in terms of the trajectory of my career, which is that, there's a tremendous amount of it has to do with a desire, tremendous amount of it has to do with angels that you meet along the way, who maybe recognize something in you before you are able to see it or to own it. A lot of it has to do with timing and opportunity. And a lot of it has to do with trying to figure out what the actual nature of your success is in relationship to your vision of the thing that you do. And I've been very fortunate in terms of being very successful at the thing that I do. A lot of it I thought was absolutely dependent on being very attached to New York City and to my generation and that moment at which we all emerged. And during my years there, something happened that none of us could see, which is that the art world changed, and it moved away from being an art world to becoming an art market. And I'm thinking of this in the visual arts. The others can speak to whether that happened in their disciplines, but it became an art market, which put an onus on the object and the process of making art that was very different than what I believe in, what I inspires me, etc. And what I also noticed was that because of the internet, ideas travel very quickly around the world. And this idea of a central place, like New York used to be, or Paris before that, or Berlin, or London, et cetera, became obsolete as an idea for creativity, for the necessity of it, because you get so much in terms of your stimulation from receiving so much information very quickly, no matter where you are. And then it's just about what you do with that. And so the idea of trying to move something away from the traditional notion of a center to find a creative vitality in a small town that is of equal interest to people, of equal significance to both people directly in their daily lives, like Emily was talking about in terms of her both farming program and including the art experience in that, et cetera. That kind of meaningfulness, too, also something where you can create a enough gravitational force that attracts people to you rather than you going to them. And so in terms of legacy, if any part of that actually happened, I think I'd feel pretty good about it. So.
Emily and Stephen, do you want to contribute to the topic?
Yeah, legacy. If you know my work, and if you don't, Google me quickly. But the work is very fast, it's complex, it's abstract, um, it's sexy. I'm happy if people think of that when they think of my work. But what I realized when I was forming this particular endeavor, and what I realized was important to me, was the time that I've spent in the unconscious, intuitive, creative state, barefoot, with a bunch of other people in the room. And that is the thing that has changed my life. I realized that if I could create a place where other people could experience that to trigger their creative process, that would be an incredible legacy to be part of. So that's the direction I've chosen to go. I mean, obviously I still have my company, I'm still making work. I believe very strongly in it. I think it's great, but there's nothing more precious than the next dance for me. And so that's what I'm leaving when I choose to leave. I hope that's what it will be. So.
I have so many thoughts. I'll start by saying I actually, in terms of legacy, I think specifically, I don't know if people are familiar with the theater in London, but artistic directors don't stay for more than 10 years there. It's frowned upon if you hang out for longer than 10 years. And I think there's something to that. I think that we stick around too long in this country in terms of legacy. So that's a thought. I know some stuff, but other people know some stuff too. And I think a diversity of perspectives, particularly at the executive level, is really critical. And I think that the time in front of us is going to call for it. And inventiveness and innovation and all that jazz. So that's a thought. With respect to sustainability, getting back to this idea of listening, I said I started the organization when I was 25 and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I did know to ask artists what they needed. I knew that much. And our programs came from the artists. We have a family residency that's for predominantly working mothers and their kids. That came out of working mothers saying to me, hey, Emily, I can't be in residence for a week. I have another job called being a mom. Could there be some way to bring my kids? So we started this family residency. With that came funding. Then we heard another need. Oh, I'm a young playwright who didn't get a fancy master's degree, and I really need a way into the theater world. Could there be a place here for me? Now, that's not to say that we have no mission and no vision. We have a very clear vision and mission of supporting artists and their work, but critical and incumbent in that is asking them what they need. And I think that what that has done is that because the needs have not been sort of imagined, but rather rooted in an actual need, there has been funding there for it, if that makes sense. And the last thing I'll say about that is to the farming operation, I was so mad at myself for taking over the farm. It was 2019, farming made running a nonprofit look like cartwheels. And then the pandemic happened. And all of a sudden, we couldn't gather for the artistic residencies, but food was something that our governor was saying everybody had access to. And so all of a sudden, we were able to pivot and really meet people where they were there. Now, I know not everybody has like a farm to their left or, whatever, but I do think that like a multiplicity of programs, we hear this word interdisciplinary thrown around, but I do think that there is something to that. And I would say that space is certainly a living testament to that being, at least for 2020, a thing that helped us tremendously.
Thank you, Emily. We have a question from James Fisher-Smith, who's involved with a 5,000 square foot community art space in Soho, and they're experiencing obviously a lot of difficulties at the moment. And his question is there still space for an art world in Lower Manhattan? That's quite a question. Eric?
Was it a couple of weeks ago in the Times crossword puzzle, there was something about, I wish I could remember the exact question, but it had to do with like a place in a thing in a neighborhood in New York that was like a monument or something like that. And I was like, what are they talking about? What is this? In fact, they named Soho. They said something, important in Soho, in this Lower Manhattan Soho. And the answer in the puzzle was, it has to do with what used to be there, and it had to do with an art world was the answer to it. So the question that is being asked is a totally legitimate one. Is there a place for it? What we're facing out here in Sag Harbor is the same thing people in New York are facing, which is that young artists can no longer afford to be here. So anything that can be done to bring talent to a place that they're not going to buy a house here, they're not going to become part of the community in the long term, but if there's something that you can do to help people that way, then there's I'm sure a need for it. So there's absolutely a legitimacy to it. But what that actually looks like in Soho, I have no idea.
So there's been quite a few questions about board building, about 4 different questions. So maybe you could all just touch on, I think you must all have amazing boards and directors. So if you just touch on that briefly, because we have about 5 minutes left.
I'll let the old guys talk about that.
Hey, watch it, you. Well, I have an incredible chair, Jill Brienza, and I've been around for 35 years. So, well, I've been around a lot longer than that, but my board has been around for 35 years, and it shifts and changes all the time. And when I was waiting to come onto this conversation, 2 people just joined the board, which I'm thrilled about. But I just, you need to keep, and it's hard right now because I'm not going out very much, but you need to keep going out, and you need to keep the momentum of your artistic vision out in the world. It's a social activity, building a board, and people need to be drawn to you and to your artistic vision, or to what the mission of your organization is doing. And if you're clear enough, and if you put that out enough, people will be drawn to it. I will say one of the things, Emily, that I wanted to say about that multiplicity. So we have a 5-bedroom house. Our retreat is small. We could fit up to 10. We have like 10 people up here, but we have a for-profit model that coexists with our not-for-profit model. So we do Airbnb when we're not giving space away, we're charging for space. And honestly, during the pandemic, it's been the only thing it's been the only source of earned income for us. And so what seemed like an improbable thing suddenly shifted into high gear, and people started coming up, small families began renting the space for like months and 2 months at a time, and kind of saved our butt. So having several different things going on in your space at once is a must. I will say that.
Boards. I wish I had known more about them when I started Space. I love my board. Robbie Stein, who's a, Sag Harbor favorite, is on the Zoom. So let's give it up for Robbie. I'm really interested in what's going to happen with board building, specifically with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do not know how we can have a group of people who are responsible for decision making where the primary requisite is your financial situation. How are we actually? How can we look at that? Okay, if that's true, which right now, the nonprofit industrial complex, that's the deal. So if that's true, and every organization right now is charged with supporting a more diverse, in all the ways we think about diversity, group of artists, makers, whatever, but the people at the table are predominantly white and affluent, I don't know how that squares. So I don't know what all the questions were, but I'm seriously interested to see how we as a sector start to look at this. Because the people at the table make the decisions, right? And how can you make decisions for a diverse set of people if it's a pretty homogenous group of people at that table? I don't know. So I think we need to flip the table a little bit on boards. I'm not saying I have the answers. I definitely don't have the answers. But my board right now is doing a ton of training around anti-racism. And I think it's necessary. So I have no idea if that was the question, but that is my strong opinion.
Thank you, Emily. And I'm glad you brought up your 9-point plan for anti-racism, which people can find on your website, and it's very interesting reading. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. And before we say goodnight, I'm going to introduce Sarah Cochran, the Executive Director of the church, to say a few words. But before that, I want to thank Emily, Stephen, and Eric for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm very inspired by what all of you do. And if we were in the audience, I would give you a huge round of applause for your generosity, for your amazing generosity in what you do. So it's so needed. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and say goodnight.
Good evening. I would just sorry, we've got a bit of an echo. Hopefully that's a bit better. I'd just like to thank all of our collaborators, Andrea, Elise, Patrick, and the whole crew at Guildhall. Thank you to our panelists, Emily, Stephen, Mary Jane for your moderation, and of course, Eric. And I'd like to thank you, our audience, for sharing part of your Sunday with us. In these challenging times, I think we all believe in the urgent need for the freedom, the fun, and the sort of thinking that the arts generally can provide for us. We at the church are anxious to open our doors as soon as we can, anxious to welcome you into our space, and anxious to deepen this collaboration, both here on the East End and also throughout the region. So this is good night for now, but please look us up at sagharborchurch.org. Follow us all on social media. Your participation in what each of our institutions does is our lifeblood. And really just goodbye for now, but looking forward to more of these to come and to seeing you, our audience, back in our spaces as soon as it is safe and possible. Thank you.